Hey, welcome back, fellas. In today's video, I found this interesting little topic covered by this woman who is talking about the real reason the dating is collapsing. I just saw a couple bit of intro and I felt like sharing it, so let's just watch. It's pretty much a blind reaction, so let's just see what she's talking about.
Modern dating is collapsing, and the same group is protected from scrutiny. Right now, 63% of men aged 18 to 29 are single, compared to just 34% of women. That is not a small gap. That is a structural asymmetry. That tells us something important immediately. Women are not broadly opting out of dating. They are consolidating access around a smaller group of men, which means competition is higher, selectivity matters more, peer influence carries more weight, and small social pressures have outsized returns. At the same time, young adults are having less sex than any generation on record, and loneliness is accelerating so fast that the US Surgeon General has declared this a public health crisis, with men being disproportionately affected. So let's be very clear about the picture that we're looking at. Fewer relationships, less sex, more loneliness, more resentment, more confusion, and more ideological conflict.
Sorry for pausing, guys. Just wanted to tell you one thing, like because of all this stuff that's happening to the younger guys, like fewer relationship, less sex and all that stuff, the issue is men adapt. Like instead of, thinking about it over and over, men adapt and just move on, and maybe some just don't handle it properly. That's why they need treatment and all that stuff, but most men just adapt to the lifestyle and they just move on. That's why we see people going the Mgtow way, where we just don't care anymore. But it's still, that's the reason, because you don't get the affection and all that stuff at a younger age, so you just think, why bother? Anyways, let's continue.
Whatever it is that we're doing right now, it's not working. And when the system fails this badly, the first question should always be, what variables are we refusing to examine? And this is where things get uncomfortable. When modern dating fails, the default explanation is almost always the same. Men need to improve. Men fear commitment. Men are just emotionally unavailable. No, it's masculinity. That's the problem. Entire industries, content ecosystems, and academic frameworks exist to just scrutinize male behavior. But there is a glaring absence in this entire conversation: female behavior, especially how women influence other women. And this entire concept is treated as untouchable, not because it's not important, but because examining this, it violates a moral narrative. And that moral narrative sounds a lot like this: women are simply victims of a system. They're not agents within them. And the problem with that story isn't compassion. The problem is its incompleteness, because systems don't collapse unless multiple forces are interacting. And one of the most powerful forces in dating, documented across evolutionary psychology, social psychology, and behavioral economics, is female peer regulation. So here's the Pandora's box. Women do not regulate dating primarily through laws, force, or authority, but they regulate it socially through shame, praise, reputation, moral language, inclusion and exclusion, and what gets labeled empowering versus problematic. And research consistently shows that women are much more sensitive to the same-sex peer norms than men, particularly around sexual behavior, appearance, relationship standards, and mate selection,
Now that was interesting, because most of the time you don't get the idea of how the woman thinks. Now from this video, I'm getting some sense. I mean, we all know that. Thanks to social media, we all know that they love the glamorous lifestyle. They see the other ladies going on trips, on yacht, of flying somewhere, some new boyfriend making who is good looking and all that stuff. They see that, they compare that, and they want that in their life. Compared to us men, when we see that, all we can say, all right, it's cool. Like maybe he's lucky, or maybe he has life sorted out. We don't care much, because we know that's not our thing. We will achieve that when we can, or just move on and do our own thing. But that's not how the woman works, and they constantly want that thing right now. And it's kind of funny that the women are tend to made to believe that the lifestyle the man should provide them. They should not, think that they are not worth of that lifestyle. You just haven't found the guy that can provide you that lifestyle. So just keep looking, just getting ran through or all that until you find that guy or that lifestyle. That's the kind of modern nonsense we gotta deal with. Let's continue.
I want to define what we mean by relative mate value. Mate value is not some absolute score. It's contextual, comparative, and market-based. Essentially, what this means is how desirable a woman is compared to other women who are available to the exact same pool of men for the same outcomes: attention, commitment, marriage, resources. And this is critical. Women are not competing to win in a vacuum. They are competing positionally. So what that means in reality isn't just, am I attractive? It means, am I more desirable than my nearest alternative to the men that I want? And this is why female competition rarely aims to dominate women outright, because domination is risky, visible, and socially punishable. So relative devaluation is much safer. It's quieter, and ultimately, it's more effective. So the goal is not to rise absolutely, but to make your rival appear less appealing by contrast. That is the key. Now, in order to give this clarity and texture in the modern world, I'm going to break down the 5 main categories of relative.
Alright, we see that often, like how many times we are seeing those things like lady trying to protect a fat woman or someone like that because she knows like she has no competition with that, and she always needs that around to make it seem like she's the better one, she's the prettier one, she will always get the attention whenever she's around the not so attractive person or friend.
Relative mate value, and exactly how women are competing with other women, unbeknownst to the majority of people, because again, we're not allowed to talk about this. Now, let's start with a point that often gets misunderstood. When we talk about female competition targeting relative mate value, we're not saying that women are competing to be the most beautiful in some like abstract sense. They're not. They're competing over how beauty is interpreted by the men who hold commitment leverage. And that distinction does matter, because beauty is not just about how you look. It's about what your appearance signals, especially to men who are deciding if a woman is somebody that they want to commit to long term. Now, here's the paradox that now defines modern dating. In today's culture, women increasingly pressure other women towards artificial enhancements, Botox, filler, cosmetic procedures, fake lashes, hyper-stylized aesthetics, even though men consistently and across decades of research report consistently preferring a more natural look, especially when evaluating women for long-term commitment. And that contradiction is not accidental. What's interesting is that across cultures and time, male preference data is remarkably stable. Youth cues, health cues, facial symmetry, clear skin, and low visual artificiality, especially for commitment. And men also tend to penalize signals that suggest high maintenance, inauthenticity, or perceived deception, chameleon-esque, fake. Now,
The men's opinion or choices for a woman has never changed. They will never change because that's what we are. Even generations above and below, we all have same kind of demands from a woman. Just be feminine, just be natural and all that stuff. Too much makeup just makes you cringe. It's gonna be for any man out there, unless he's into like weird stuff, but that's an exception. But women tend to argue back. They just think that no, you don't want that. This is how we're gonna be and you should accept us like that. No, thank you. We'd rather stay away from you.
what that doesn't mean is that men absolutely hate makeup or grooming, but it does mean that men are more sensitive to what artificiality implies, aka stability, loyalty, and authenticity. And this is specific to when they're considering a partner, a long-term commitment, not just attraction. Now you might be wondering, why is it that every single woman I look at is Botoxed, fillered, plastic surgery to the nines? Well, here's the key to that observation. The strongest pressure towards overfilled lips, exaggerated facial features, Instagram face uniformity, and cosmetic escalation, it does not come from men. It comes from female peer groups. Influencer culture that's overwhelmingly women, female. The next domain of our conversation is somewhat unavoidable. We're gonna talk about sexual selectivity. Not sexuality, not desire, selectivity. Because in mating markets, in dating markets, right, selectivity is leverage. And leverage, specifically female leverage, doesn't disappear quietly. It gets contested. Now, from a behavioral standpoint, sexual selectivity signals multiple things simultaneously. It signals self-control, standards, long-term orientation perceives scarcity and commitment value. Again, this is not controversial in research. Across cultures, generations, time, men differentiate between women they desire sexually and women they consider for a long-term partnership. And the sexual availability of a woman, well, that dictates her categorization. This is why body count is such an uncomfortable conversation for us to have, but nevertheless, holds plenty of merit. Now, an important note is this does not mean that men don't like sexuality. They just like restraint with sexuality. There is a difference between sexual restraint and sexual access, especially when commitment is the goal. And this creates a problem because if one woman maintains high selectivity, her relative leverage increases. And relative leverage is exactly what competition targets. So, what happens socially? Rather than confronting selectivity directly, the pressure always comes sideways. It sounds like, you're too uptight, you're a prude, you're too judgmental. It's not that deep. You're repressing yourself. You've got internalized misogyny, or this is a product of the patriarchy. Now I want you to notice what's happening here.
See how women have just ruined everything for themselves. Men never told them to sleep around or anything. In fact, it's the woman's duty to make sure the man is good enough to provide him an access for sex. It was best when it was only given after the marriage. But because like all this feminism and all that stuff where you're free to be anything. So they just decided to be just a horse. They just be horse. That's all they decided to be because that implements being free. That implements like against the patriarchy and all that stuff. They just like to feed all these buzzwords. But it has been happening for decades. It's nothing new, but it just feels sad that that's how we decided to be free. That's how they decided how freedom should be.
Social proof and group alignment determine whether she is socially sanctioned or quietly sidelined. Because fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, men do not assess women in isolation. They assess women inside of context, specifically social context. And social context tells a very big story long before a personal one-on-one interaction will. So to be clear, social proof is not popularity. I think most men who've got their wits about them understand that social media standing, followers, likes, visibility is not a great gauge of the quality of the woman that you're engaging with. So if it's not popularity, it has to be endorsement. Do other people trust her? Do other people respect her? And do other people want her around? For men, specifically men who are looking for a long-term commitment, this social proof reduces the level of uncertainty when it comes to making that decision. It answers the question that most men are biologically wired to answer. Is she stable? Is she respectable? Is she likely to integrate into my life without chaos? And this is why group reactions really matter. A woman doesn't need universal approval of her, but she does need the absence of this quiet resistance. Because here's the truth. A woman can be attractive, intelligent, and emotionally stable. But if her peer group subtly distances themselves from her, her relative mate value drops. And not because she's changed or done anything wrong, but because the signal changed. And men, they interpret group distancing as a signal. Something must be wrong. Maybe she's unstable. Something's gotta be hidden about this girl. And because the distancing is subtle, it feels credible. No one's accusing, no one's attacking. They're just not enthusiastic. And that is enough. So you might be wondering, how does this actually work? Well, group alignment is rarely enforced through confrontation. Again, we've acknowledged that women are not the most confrontational beings, and rightfully so. But it is enforced through group gatherings where the invitation just doesn't come, delayed responses, reduced enthusiasm, a lack of public support, and a strategic silence. And this is why it's so difficult to name what is going on here.
Well, that was interesting because as a man, I cannot understand how a female brain works. So maybe this is how they suppress themselves. That's why we see all of a sudden their friendship drops and everything. Maybe, I don't know the reason. For men, it's just direct. It has to be something very significant for a man to drop his friendship or talking with someone. So understanding how the female brain works or how the women handle their friendships is interesting to watch. Let me know what you guys feel about that. Let's continue.
Nothing bad has happened, yet everything has changed. And this ultimately happens when the woman is perceived to be deviating from the standards they're trying to set. When she raises her own standards, starts to prioritize commitments in her life, relationships, men. She rejects hookups or other norms. She starts to outgrow this group. And to them, they will gossip about her, leverage her reputation, and ultimately decenter her as if she's the problem. And this decentering, well, it lowers their perceived mate value. Because ultimately, social proof doesn't eliminate your value, and it doesn't eliminate attraction, but it does filter seriousness. Again, men have buckets of women, short-term and long-term. And men might still desire a woman who lacks group alignment. But when it comes to long-term commitment, most men will hesitate. Because a long-term commitment isn't just about the woman in front of you, it's about the life that you will have with the woman in front of you.
I wish I was one of those guys with buckets of lists of women. Get quite and categorized into not serious and serious. Most men don't have that luxury. You're even lucky to find one good enough to date. Forget about relationship, long-term relationship, wedding, forget about that. Just finding someone good enough to date for a couple of weeks or months is good enough these days. Just to find out what that person is, because most often, the first date itself doesn't happen, and the women are just very picky about the men these days. They want the luxurious lifestyle from the start. They want first date to be some kind of dinner in some fancy place. No longer the coffee date are enough. It's just crazy out there.
Next, all of the things that we've just forementioned, how we penetrate, impact, and change relative mate value, these things can somewhat be touched upon, at least in theory, but this additional layer makes questioning any of this almost impossible, and it drives me insane, transparently. And that's the moral language. You've heard me say this a dozen times in this video, but it's so important for us to be able to be aware of and pinpoint. Because once competition is framed as virtue, criticism doesn't just sound wrong, it sounds immoral. Because moral language doesn't argue outcomes, it ends the debate. When a behavior is framed as empowering, progressive, healthy, healing, the right side of history, questioning it no longer sounds analytical. It sounds like an attack. And by design, this is not accidental. From a social standpoint, moral language performs three functions simultaneously. It signals group membership, you're in the group or you're out of the group. It protects the speaker from scrutiny, and it converts a disagreement into a character judgment. All the labels that you get called, that's your character. They're attacking it. They don't like it. And once those three things are actually in place, well, the system just regulates itself. It defends itself, and it attacks those who argue against it until they don't. Now, if you pay attention to this, you will see this clear as day. Disagreements are not met with quality counter arguments. They're met with labels. You never hear, well, I disagree with your reasoning and here's why. Here's what I think you missed. What you do hear is, that's internalized misogyny. That's toxic. That's unsafe. That's patriarchal. That's hurtful, harmful rhetoric. Notice what's missing. Evidence, outcomes, trade-offs, because moral language doesn't need them. Because its power doesn't come from claims of truth. It comes from social consequences. And once a behavior is morally coded, opting out of this becomes costly. And we've seen this. You've seen it in other places of your life. I promise you, if you're in the United States, you saw this. Just gonna leave that there. Now you might be wondering, yes, I see this. Why is this so common? It drives me insane. Good, me too. But here's why. It's incredibly effective for a few things. One, it allows regulation without authority. Zero authority required. It also allows for punishment without direct confrontation. I can get you fired from your job because you said something that's harmful. And it gives control without ownership. And most importantly, it allows competition to continue without ever being acknowledged as competition. Because again, no one thinks they're competing. It's morally sound, it's righteous. They think they're being good. Now I want to back up and highlight this clearly within everything we've just talked about. Look at how—
That was a long segment, but she said it so perfectly. Like, the ladies are always protected. You cannot criticize them. You've seen this countless time on social media, on YouTube, everywhere you've seen this topic. You see that when the man is trying to give some logical reasoning, all of a sudden they will point out how, like he's an incel, like some kind of man just hating on women, any kind of term that they just come up with new term every 2 years or something like that. I can't keep up. But they say that. They will say these words instead of fighting back with logic and reasoning from their end, because they just know how to fight back with those insults. They don't know how to feel or understand why this is happening. They don't care about the reasoning. They don't care about changing themselves at all. In their head, they're perfectly fine human being. Nothing is wrong with them. That's why the kind of society we live in will never change, and it will only get worse from here. It will only get worse. It's never gonna get good. Until some meteor falls and all the humans perish and some new humans born, maybe then there's some chance. But for now, yeah, no chance at all.
How these patterns show up in the things that we've previously discussed. Selectivity, you're judgmental. Modesty, you're repressing yourself. Marriage goals, desperation, right? A part of the patriarchy. Immoral. Stability, well, you're settling. You're settling for less. Disagreement, it's harmful. Harmful. Your words are violent. You're disagreeing with me in a way I don't like, and I cannot counter argue, so you're harming me with your words. None of these, again, argue outcomes. They pathologize intent. And once the intent is pathologized, the behavior itself collapses. Because if you do it, you're bad. You're awful. You're all of these labels. If you engage in any thought pattern that might question what they want you to just blindly believe. And that is how leverage is neutralized. And then there's a bind that this moral language creates, right? If you agree, you're evolved, enlightened, expansive. And if you disagree, well, you're the problem. And unfortunately, this binary removes the possibility of nuances, trade-offs, or just an honest analysis, which is exactly why it persists. Because ultimately, and in a more sinister light of all of this, systems that can't be questioned can't be corrected. Now, this is the part that people resist the most. Most women who operate this way believe what they're doing is just, and they refuse to acknowledge the harm that this is doing. Because acknowledging that this is in play, acknowledging that this is hurting people, acknowledging that this is causing more harm, it's destabilizing our society, it's destabilizing our relationships, it's having greater impacts than we actually feel comfortable talking about. It would mean admitting influence, taking responsibility, holding yourself accountable, even if the harm was unintended.
I already said that, and she just confirmed that for me. I said that they think they're right, they will never change, and the meteor is the only last option for us. Well, anyways, I guess that's it for this video. The original video is almost an hour long. I will edit it to the point that I only cover the main segments. If you're interested in watching the entire one, I'll have the link below. Do watch it out, it's hour long. I did skip out some bits. And yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Let me know what you feel, and I'll see you next one. Thanks for watching.